When a desperate young woman accidentally embraces a wealthy stranger outside a dusty Nevada general store, she has no idea he's the mining heir sent to destroy her community. But as their worlds collide in the frontier town of Silver Creek, will one moment of human kindness be enough to change the fate of an entire valley? Catherine's bare feet hit the dusty ground running as gunshots echoed through Silver Creek's main street. She clutched her empty flour sack tight against her chest, her heart pounding like a wild horse trying to break free. The Nevada Territory sun blazed overhead in the summer of 1864, turning the dirt roads into a burning maze she had to cross. "Get down, girl!" shouted old Pete from behind his wagon. His weathered hands waved frantically as more shots rang out from the saloon. Catherine dove behind a water barrel, her knees scraping against the rough wood. The shooting wasn't unusual in Silver Creek, but today felt different. Today, the whole town buzzed with whispers about strangers coming to change everything. She peeked around the barrel and saw two men facing off in the middle of the street. One wore the dusty clothes of a local ranch hand. The other dressed in fancy city clothes that cost more than her family made in a year. The rich man's horse stamped nervously nearby, its saddle decorated with silver that caught the sunlight like stars. "You tell your boss we ain't selling," the ranch hand yelled, his gun still drawn. "This land belongs to folks who work it, not some company from back east." The well-dressed man raised his hands slowly. "I'm just here to talk, friend. No need for violence." Catherine watched as the tension stretched like a rope about to snap. She needed to get to Henderson's store before it closed, but crossing the street now meant walking right through the middle of this standoff. Her family's empty pantry couldn't wait another day. Her father had been too sick to work for weeks, and their small savings had dried up like a desert stream. The ranch hand finally lowered his gun and spat in the dirt. "You city folk are all the same. Come here talking pretty words while planning to steal everything we got." He holstered his weapon and stalked toward the saloon, his boots kicking up angry clouds of dust. Catherine seized her chance and darted across the street. Her worn dress fluttered in the hot breeze as she ran, trying to reach Henderson's store before anyone else decided to start shooting. But as she rounded the corner, she slammed straight into someone coming the other way. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. She looked up into the greenest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face that belonged to the fancy stranger from the street fight. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd thought. Maybe 25, with hands that looked too soft for real work. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice carrying an accent that spoke of big cities and expensive schools. His concern seemed real, not the fake politeness she'd grown used to from people who looked down on her family. Catherine jerked back, suddenly aware of her patched dress and dusty appearance. "I'm fine," she said quickly, smoothing down her dark hair. "I didn't mean to run into you. I was just trying to get to the store before someone else decided to settle their problems with bullets." The stranger smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Smart thinking. "I'm still learning the local customs myself." Something about his gentle humor made Catherine relax slightly. She'd expected arrogance from someone wearing clothes that expensive. Instead, he seemed almost nervous, like he didn't quite know how to fit into this wild place any better than she knew how to fit into his fancy world. "You're the one they're all talking about," she said, studying his face. "The one from the mining company." His smile faded. "Word travels fast in small towns. Yes, I suppose I am. Though I'm beginning to think the stories they tell about me might be more interesting than the truth." Catherine tilted her head, curious despite herself. "What's the truth then?" The stranger glanced around at the dusty street, the simple wooden buildings, the desert stretching endlessly beyond the town limits. "The truth is, I've never been anywhere like this before. Where I come from, everything's already decided. The buildings, the people, even the conversations. Here, it feels like anything could happen." "Things happen here, all right," Catherine said dryly. "Usually the kind of things that leave folks with less than they started with." Before he could respond, the door to Henderson's store opened with a loud creak, Mr. Henderson himself stepped out, his gray beard bristling with disapproval as he spotted Catherine talking to the stranger. "Miss Miller," Henderson called, his voice carrying a warning. "Your father's been looking for you. Says it's important." Catherine's stomach dropped. When her father sent messages through Henderson, it usually meant bad news they couldn't afford. She glanced back at the stranger, suddenly aware they'd been talking like old friends when she didn't even know his name. "I have to go," she said, backing toward the store. "Wait," the stranger called after her. "I don't even know your name." Catherine paused at the store's entrance. Something in his voice made her want to answer, made her feel like her name might actually matter to someone beyond Silver Creek's dusty borders. "Catherine," she said softly. "Catherine Miller. Catherine." He repeated it like he was testing how it sounded. "I'm William Montgomery." The name hit her like cold water. Montgomery. Everyone in town had heard that name whispered with fear and anger. Montgomery Mining Company. The business that wanted to tear up their valley and leave nothing but empty holes in the ground. Catherine's face went pale. She'd been talking to the enemy. And worse, she'd almost liked him. Without another word, she fled into the store, leaving William standing alone in the street, wondering why her expression had changed so completely when he'd told her his name. Inside Henderson's store, Catherine's hand shook as she pretended to examine a bolt of fabric she couldn't afford. Through the window, she could see William still standing where she'd left him, his face troubled and confused. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "That man's trouble, Catherine," Henderson said quietly, joining her at the window. His weathered fingers drummed against the counter. "Folks are saying his family's company wants to buy up the whole valley, turn it all into one giant mining operation." Catherine pressed her lips together. She'd heard the rumors, but seeing William up close made them feel more real and more complicated. He didn't look like someone who wanted to destroy people's lives. But then again, rich folks probably got plenty of practice at hiding their true intentions behind pleasant smiles. "What did my father want?" she asked, changing the subject before her thoughts could wander further down that dangerous path. Henderson's expression grew serious. "He got word from the bank in Carson City. Says they're calling in all outstanding loans by the end of the month. Every family that owes money needs to pay up, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Catherine's knees nearly buckled. Their small farm already carried more debt than her father could handle while he was healthy. With him laid up sick, they had no way to earn the money they owed. Losing their land would mean losing everything. "How much time do we have?" she whispered. 3 weeks. Maybe less, if they decide to move fast. Henderson's voice was gentle but honest. "I wish I had better news, child." Catherine nodded numbly and walked toward the door. She needed air, needed space to think, needed to figure out how to save her family from disaster. But as she stepped outside, she nearly collided with William Montgomery for the second time that day. "Miss Miller, I was hoping," he began, then stopped when he saw her face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Catherine said bitterly. "Maybe I'm looking at one right now." William's brow furrowed. "I don't understand. Did I say something to offend you? If I did, I certainly didn't mean to." Catherine wanted to walk away, wanted to pretend this conversation had never happened, but anger and fear made her bold. "Your name is Montgomery. Your family owns the mining company that's trying to destroy our town, and you're standing here acting like we're just two people having a friendly chat." "We are just two people having a friendly chat," William said carefully. "At least, I thought we were." "Nothing about this is friendly," Catherine's voice rose, drawing stares from other folks on the street. "You're here to steal our land, aren't you? To turn our homes into mining pits and scatter our families like tumbleweeds in the wind." William took a step back, clearly shaken by her accusation. "I'm here on business for my father's company, yes, but I'm not here to steal anything from anyone. I'm here to make fair offers for land purchases." "Fair?" Catherine laughed. But there was no humor in it. What's fair about forcing families to sell the only homes they've ever known? What's fair about turning a whole valley into a scar in the earth just so rich folks back east can get richer? It's not that simple, William protested. Mining creates jobs, brings money into communities. It helps people build better lives. Better for who? Catherine shot back. Better for the families who have to leave? Better for the land that gets torn apart? Or just better for the people who own the companies? William opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Catherine could see him thinking, really thinking, maybe for the first time, about what his family's business actually meant for the people who lived in the places they wanted to mine. I never thought about it that way, he admitted quietly. Well, maybe it's time you started thinking about it. Catherine turned to go, then paused. That man you faced down in the street earlier? He's got 3 children, and a wife who's expecting another baby. The land you want to buy feeds his family. It's not just property to him. It's everything he has in the world. She walked away before William could respond, leaving him standing alone outside Henderson's store, with her words echoing in his mind. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, he began to wonder if the business that had seemed so straightforward from his father's office in San Francisco might be more complicated than anyone had told him. That evening, William sat in his room at the town's only hotel, staring out at the desert landscape painted purple and gold by the setting sun. He'd come to Silver Creek with clear instructions: assess the land, make offers to property owners, and secure the valley for Montgomery Mining Company's expansion plans. Simple business. But Catherine Miller's angry words had planted seeds of doubt he couldn't ignore. What did he really know about the people who lived here? What did he know about what they'd lose if his father's plans went forward? A knock at his door interrupted his brooding thoughts. The hotel owner, Mrs. Patterson, stood in the hallway holding a dinner tray. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on his small table. "Most folks eat downstairs in the common room, but I figured you might prefer some privacy tonight." William understood. After the confrontation in the street and his public argument with Catherine, he probably wasn't welcome company for most of Silver Creek's residents. "Mrs. Patterson," he said as she prepared to leave, "what can you tell me about the Miller family?" The older woman's expression softened. "Good people. Catherine's father, Robert, used to be one of the best horse trainers in the territory before he took sick. Her mother died when Catherine was just 15, left her to raise her younger brother and take care of her father. That girl works harder than most grown men, trying to keep their little farm going. They're struggling financially?" Mrs. Patterson gave him a sharp look. "Most everyone around here is struggling, Mr. Montgomery. That's what happens when the land gives you just enough to survive, but never enough to get ahead. Folks make do, help each other when they can, and hope for better times." After she left, William found himself unable to eat. He kept thinking about Catherine's fierce defense of her community, her anger at the thought of losing everything she'd worked to protect. He'd never met anyone who fought so hard for so little, who found such value in things he'd been taught to see as obstacles to progress. What was he really doing here? And more importantly, what was he going to do about the growing certainty that everything he'd believed about his family's business might be wrong? Catherine's hands shook as she stared at the stranger who had just offered to pay her family's debt. The morning light streaming through Henderson's store windows made his fancy clothes shine like silver coins. She had never seen buttons so polished or boots so perfect. "I don't need your money," she said, lifting her chin high. Her voice came out stronger than she felt inside. The other customers in the store stopped talking and turned to watch. Mrs. Patterson clutched her purse tighter, and old Mr. Jenkins leaned forward on his walking stick. William's green eyes widened. Most people jumped at his offers of help. They smiled, big smiles, and thanked him over and over. But this girl with dirt under her fingernails and patches on her dress was saying no to him. No one ever said no to a Montgomery. "Why not?" he asked, forgetting to use his fancy manners. "Your family needs help, and I have money to spare." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. Behind her, she heard Henderson clearing his throat like he always did when customers argued. She knew everyone was listening to every word. By sunset, the whole town would know about this conversation. "Because I'm not some lost puppy you can feed and forget about," she snapped. Her dark eyes flashed like lightning before thunder. "We may not have much, but we have our pride." William stepped closer, lowering his voice. He smelled like expensive soap and leather polish, nothing like the men in Silver Creek who smelled of honest sweat and desert dust. "I wasn't trying to insult you," he said softly. When someone shows me kindness, I want to return it." Catherine blinked. Kindness? All she had done was keep him from falling when he stumbled through the door. Any decent person would have done the same thing. "That wasn't kindness," she said, confused. "That was just normal." Something in William's face changed. His perfect smile faded, and for a moment he looked almost sad. "Normal," he repeated, like the word tasted strange in his mouth. Henderson coughed again, louder this time. "Miss Miller, about your father's account." The spell broke. Catherine remembered where she was and why she had come. Her family needed flour, salt, and medicine for her mother's cough. They needed these things, but they couldn't pay for them. At least not all at once. She pulled out her small cloth purse and counted the coins inside. 15 cents. It wasn't enough for everything, but it was all they had, until her father sold another piece of furniture or found work somewhere. "I can pay 15 cents today," she told Henderson, "and maybe 20 cents next week." Henderson's weathered face softened. He had known Catherine since she was a little girl running around his store while her mother shopped. He remembered when the Miller family had money, before her father got sick and couldn't work the mine anymore. "That's fine, child," he said gently. "Take what you need." But William shook his head. "No, put it all on my account, please." "I said no." Catherine's voice rang out sharp and clear. Several people jumped. Even tough old Mr. Jenkins looked surprised. The store fell silent, except for the buzzing of flies near the candy jars. Catherine felt everyone staring at her, but she didn't care. She had been poor before, and she would find a way to manage without charity from strangers. William studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Back east, people always took his money. They smiled and bowed and promised to remember his generosity. But this girl was different. She stood straight and proud even though her dress had been mended with different colored thread. "What if it wasn't charity?" he asked suddenly. Catherine frowned. "What do you mean? What if you did something for me in return?" Now she really was confused. What could she possibly do for someone who wore clothes that cost more than her family made in a year? William's mind raced. He hadn't planned this conversation, but something about Catherine's fierce independence made him want to know more about her, about this town, about people who chose pride over comfort. "I'm new here," he said. "I don't know anyone or anything about Silver Creek. Maybe you could show me around town. Tell me about the people and places." Catherine's frown deepened. "Why would you want to know about this place? It's nothing special." "Maybe that's exactly why I want to know about it." The answer made no sense to Catherine, but she could see he was serious. His green eyes held no trace of mockery or pity, just genuine curiosity. Henderson cleared his throat a third time. "Miss Miller, I hate to rush, but other customers are waiting." Catherine looked around and saw that 3 more people had entered the store. They were all watching the strange conversation between the poor girl and the rich stranger. "Fine," she said quickly. 1 hour. I'll show you around town for 1 hour. But after that, we're even." William smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. 1 hour, he agreed. Henderson packed Catherine's supplies into her flour sack, while William counted out coins from a leather wallet that held more money than Catherine had ever seen in one place. The other customers whispered among themselves, creating a low buzz of gossip that would spread through Silver Creek faster than wildfire. As they prepared to leave the store together, Catherine wondered what she had just gotten herself into. Showing a stranger around town seemed simple enough, but something about William Montgomery made her think that nothing involving him would be simple. The bell chimed as they stepped outside into the bright Nevada sunshine. Catherine adjusted her worn shawl and pointed toward the main street. "Where do you want to start?" she asked. William looked around at the dusty buildings and wooden sidewalks. Everything seemed so different from the polished cities he knew. So real and rough and honest. "Surprise me," he said. 3 days after their tour of Silver Creek, Catherine was beating dust from her family's old rug when her younger brother Daniel came running up the dirt path to their cabin. His face was red from the desert sun, and sweat dripped from his forehead like he had been running for miles. "Catherine," he called out, gasping for breath. "You need to hear this." She dropped the rug and hurried to meet him. Daniel was only 12, but he was smart and never got excited about nothing. If he was this worked up, something important had happened. "What's wrong?" she asked, helping him sit on the wooden steps of their small porch. "That fancy man you were talking to at Henderson's store," Daniel panted. "The one with the expensive clothes. People are saying he's not just visiting Silver Creek." Catherine's stomach suddenly felt like she had swallowed cold stones. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Patterson heard it from her cousin, who works at the telegraph office," Daniel explained. "That man is William Montgomery. His family owns the Montgomery Mining Company." The words hit Catherine like a punch to the chest. She sat down hard on the steps next to her brother, her mind spinning with the terrible meaning of what he had just told her. Montgomery Mining Company. Everyone in Silver Creek knew that name. They were the big company from back east that had been buying up small mines all over Nevada territory. They paid good money, but once they owned a mine, they usually wanted the land around it too. And the people living on that land had to move somewhere else. "Are you sure?" Catherine whispered. Daniel nodded. "Mrs. Patterson's cousin saw the telegram. William Montgomery is here to look at buying land for the company. Not just mine land, Catherine. Regular land where families live." Catherine felt sick. During their hour together, William had asked so many questions about the families in town. He wanted to know who owned what land, how long they had lived there, whether they were happy in Silver Creek. She had thought he was just being friendly and curious. Now she realized he had been gathering information. "There's more," Daniel said quietly. Catherine's heart sank even further. "What?" "People are saying the Montgomery Company wants to build a big new mine right here in our valley. They need lots of land for it, including the land where our cabin sits." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Catherine gripped the porch railing to keep from falling over. Their little cabin wasn't much, but it was home. It was where her mother had taught her to cook and sew, where her father had read stories by lamplight before he got sick, where Daniel had taken his first steps and spoken his first words. "They can't just take our home," she said, but her voice sounded small and scared. "They can if they pay for it," Daniel replied. "Mrs. Patterson says her cousin heard they're offering good money, more money than most folks in Silver Creek have ever seen." Catherine tried to imagine having more money than she had ever seen. It sounded wonderful, but where would they go with that money? Silver Creek was the only home she had ever known. Her mother was buried in the little cemetery behind the church. Her memories, good and bad, were tied to this place. "Maybe the rumors are wrong," she said, but she didn't believe it herself. Daniel gave her a look that was too serious for a 12-year-old boy. "Catherine, I saw him this morning. The Montgomery man. He was walking around town with a notebook, writing things down. He measured the distance between buildings. He counted how many families live on each street." Catherine closed her eyes and tried to remember everything William had said during their tour. He had asked about the schoolhouse, the church, the families who lived in each part of town. He had seemed so interested, so genuinely curious about their lives. Had it all been an act? She thought about the moment in Henderson's store when he offered to pay her family's debt. The way he had looked at her when she refused his charity. The surprise in his green eyes when she treated him like a normal person instead of someone special. Could someone fake that kind of reaction? "What are we going to do?" Daniel asked. Before Catherine could answer, they heard the sound of horse hooves on the dusty road that led to their cabin. She looked up and felt her heart skip a beat. William Montgomery was riding toward their home on a beautiful brown horse that probably cost more than her family made in 5 years. He sat straight in the saddle like someone who had been riding since childhood, but his face looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure he should be there. "Go inside," Catherine told Daniel quickly. "But Catherine, now," she said firmly. "Tell Mother and Father I'm talking to someone about business." Daniel's eyes widened, but he obeyed. He slipped through the front door, though Catherine was sure he would be listening from just inside. William dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post near their small vegetable garden. Catherine noticed he was careful not to let the animal step on her plants. That was something, at least. "Miss Miller," he said, walking toward the porch. He held his hat in his hands and looked nervous. "I hope you don't mind me visiting." Catherine stood up and crossed her arms. "That depends on why you're here." Something in her tone made him stop walking. He studied her face, and she saw the exact moment when he realized she knew who he really was. "You've heard the rumors," he said softly. "Are they rumors?" Catherine asked. "Or are they true?" William was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the desert wind rustled through the sage brush and made the loose boards of their cabin creak. In the distance, a hawk circled high above the valley, searching for prey. "They're true," he said finally. "I am here on business for Montgomery Mining Company." The admission hit Catherine like cold water, even though she had been expecting it. Hearing him say it out loud made it real, in a way that gossip and rumors couldn't. "So, our tour of the town," she said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "That was just you doing research." "No," William said quickly. "Catherine, I know how this looks, but—" "It looks like you lied to me," she interrupted. "It looks like you pretended to be interested in our town and our people so you could figure out how to take our homes away from us." William stepped closer, his green eyes intense. "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen?" Catherine demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you used my kindness to gather information that will hurt my family and my friends." The words seemed to hit William like physical blows. He ran a hand through his dark hair and looked away from her toward the mountains that surrounded Silver Creek. "When I came to Silver Creek," he said slowly, "I had a job to do. A simple job. Look at the land, meet with property owners, make offers for the company. And then I met you." He looked back at her, and Catherine saw something in his face that made her anger waver slightly. "Catherine, I've been to dozens of towns on business for my father's company. I've met hundreds of people, but I've never met anyone like you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw just a person, instead of a source of money or power or opportunity." Catherine frowned. She didn't understand what he was trying to tell her. William stepped closer, his voice becoming more urgent. "You have no idea what it's like to never know if people like you for yourself or for what you can give them. But when you refused my offer to pay your family's debt, when you insisted on doing something for me in return, you treated me like I was worth something beyond my wallet. That doesn't change why you're here," Catherine said, though her voice was softer now. "No," William agreed. "It doesn't. But it changes everything else." The angry crowd gathered like storm clouds around the Miller cabin as Daniel burst through the door, his chest heaving from running. "Catherine, they're coming! Half the town's marching this way, and they're carrying torches." Catherine dropped the mending in her lap and rushed to the window. Through the dusty glass, she could see at least 20 people stomping up the dirt path toward their home. Mrs. Patterson led the group, her face twisted with rage, while Mr. Henderson and several other merchants followed close behind. "What do they want?" Catherine's mother asked, pulling her shawl tight around her thin shoulders. "They think Catherine's been helping that Montgomery fellow trick us all," Daniel explained, his young voice cracking with fear. "Someone saw them talking on the hill yesterday, and now everybody's saying she's a spy for the mining company." The accusation hit Catherine like a slap. She had spent the previous evening listening to William explain his family's plans, trying to understand how someone so kind could be part of something so cruel. But now the town saw their conversation as proof of betrayal. Heavy footsteps thundered onto their wooden porch, followed by loud knocking that shook the entire cabin. "Catherine Miller, come out here right now!" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried the authority of someone used to getting her way. Catherine squared her shoulders and opened the door, stepping onto the porch to face the crowd. The setting sun cast long shadows across their angry faces, making them look like strangers, instead of neighbors she had known her entire life. "Evening, Mrs. Patterson," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What brings you all to our home?" "Don't play innocent with us, girl, Mrs. Great," Patterson snapped, waving her torch dangerously close to Catherine's face. "We know you've been meeting secretly with that mining company man. Planning to sell us all out, weren't you?" A chorus of angry voices rose from the crowd. "Traitor!" someone shouted. "How much did they pay you?" called another. Catherine felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from the torches. "I haven't betrayed anyone. William Montgomery is not what you think he is." "Oh, so now you're defending him?" Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his usually kind face hard with disappointment. "Catherine, your family owes my store more money than you can count. Did he promise to pay your debts in exchange for information about who owns what land?" The crowd murmured with approval at Henderson's theory. Catherine realized how her situation must look to them, a desperate poor girl suddenly spending time with a rich outsider. But the truth was far more complicated than their simple explanations. "You don't understand," Catherine began. But Mrs. Patterson cut her off. "We understand plenty. While we've been worrying about losing our homes, you've been making deals with the enemy." Just then, hoofbeats echoed from the main road. The crowd turned to see William riding toward them on a beautiful black horse, his expensive clothes making him stand out like a peacock among sparrows. He dismounted and walked toward the angry group with calm determination. "Good evening," he said politely, tipping his hat. "I couldn't help but notice the gathering. Is there some kind of problem?" Mrs. Patterson pointed her torch at him like a weapon. "The problem is you and your sneaky plans to steal our land." William's green eyes found Catherine's across the crowd. She saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, a decision forming, dangerous and irreversible. "Actually," William said, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air, "I'm glad you're all here. It saves me from having to call a meeting myself." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document with red seals and ribbons. The crowd fell silent, recognizing the importance of such formal papers. "This is a letter from Montgomery Mining Company headquarters, signed by my father personally," William continued. "It authorizes me to acquire all land in Silver Creek Valley, using any means necessary, including forced sales and legal seizure." Gasps and worried murmurs rippled through the crowd. Catherine felt her heart sink. Was William about to prove everyone's worst fears correct? But then William did something nobody expected. He held the document high above his head and tore it completely in half. The silence that followed was so complete that Catherine could hear her own heartbeat. William let the pieces of paper flutter to the ground like confetti. "However," he said with a slight smile, "it's rather difficult to follow orders when the authorization has been accidentally destroyed, wouldn't you say?" The torn pieces of the document lay scattered in the dust like fallen leaves, and for a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. Catherine stared at William in shock, understanding that he had just thrown away everything he was supposed to inherit. Mrs. Patterson was the first to find her voice. "What kind of trick is this?" she demanded, though her torch now trembled in her hand. William stepped forward, addressing the entire crowd with the confidence of someone who had finally discovered what he truly believed. "No trick, ma'am. Just a man who realized he was asking the wrong questions." He began walking slowly among the group, looking each person in the eye as he spoke. "I came to Silver Creek to buy your land cheaply and force out anyone who refused to sell. That was my job, my duty to the family business." Young Tommy Crawford, barely 16 and already working to support his widowed mother, stepped forward boldly, So why should we trust you now? Rich folks like you change their minds whenever it suits them. Catherine watched William's face carefully, seeing him consider the boy's challenge with genuine respect rather than dismissal. This was not the same man who had stumbled into Henderson's store just weeks ago. You're absolutely right to be suspicious, Tommy, William replied. But let me tell you what I've learned since arriving here. He paused beside Mrs. Patterson, whose anger was slowly being replaced by curiosity. I've learned that Mrs. Patterson makes the finest apple pies in 3 territories, and she gives them away to families who can't afford food. The mining company would call that poor business sense. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open in surprise. William continued moving through the crowd. I've learned that Mr. Henderson extends credit to families in need, even when he knows they may never be able to pay. The company would call that foolish generosity. He stopped in front of Daniel, Catherine's young brother. And I've learned that this young man walks 2 miles each way to school every day, even in winter storms, because he dreams of becoming a teacher. The company would call that wasted effort, since there's no immediate profit in education. Daniel's chest puffed out with pride at being noticed and praised by such an important stranger. But I call all of these things something else entirely, William continued, his voice growing stronger. I call them the foundation of a community worth preserving. Catherine felt tears building in her eyes as she watched this man risk everything he had been raised to value. So here's what I propose, William announced, pulling another document from his jacket. This one looked different, less official, written in his own handwriting. Instead of selling your land to Montgomery Mining, what if we formed our own company? A partnership where every family keeps ownership of their property, but shares in the profits of a mining operation that benefits everyone? The crowd began murmuring among themselves, confused but intrigued. Mr. Henderson frowned thoughtfully. How would such a thing work? None of us have money for mining equipment or the knowledge to run such an operation. That's where my education becomes useful instead of just decorative, William replied with a self-deprecating smile. I know the mining business, I understand contracts and negotiations, and I have contacts who could provide equipment in exchange for future profits rather than upfront payment. Mrs. Patterson lowered her torch completely. And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Montgomery? Surely you don't expect us to believe you'd give up your inheritance just to help a bunch of strangers. William's gaze found Catherine again, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. I get to become the man I was meant to be, instead of the man I was expected to become. And these strangers have become the closest thing to real friends I've ever known. Catherine stepped down from the porch, moving through the crowd toward William. The townspeople parted to let her pass, sensing that something important was about to happen. William, she said softly, using his first name in front of everyone for the first time. Your father will never forgive you for this choice. He reached out and gently took her hand, not caring who saw the gesture. Then I'll have to build a new family with people who value loyalty over profit. The crowd watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about mining rights or land ownership. It was about choosing between 2 completely different ways of living. Tommy Crawford spoke up again, his young voice carrying surprising wisdom. My pa always said that a man's worth isn't measured by what he inherits, but by what he builds with his own hands. William nodded gratefully at the boy. Your father was a wise man, Tommy. As the sun finished setting behind the mountains, the angry mob had transformed into something else entirely. A community considering a new future. Catherine squeezed William's hand and stepped forward to address her neighbors. I think we should hear more about this partnership idea, she announced. But not standing in the dark with torches. Why don't we all meet at the schoolhouse tomorrow evening? We can discuss the details properly, with time to think and ask questions. One by one, the townspeople nodded their agreement. As they began to disperse, heading back toward their homes and families, Catherine heard fragments of excited conversations about possibilities they had never dared to imagine. Mrs. Patterson was the last to leave. She approached Catherine and William with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. I owe you both an apology, she said stiffly. I let fear make me cruel. And that's not the woman I want to be. Catherine smiled warmly at the older woman. We all get scared when our security is threatened, Mrs. Patterson. What matters is that we're willing to listen to new ideas. As Mrs. Patterson walked away, William turned to Catherine with wonder in his eyes. Do you really think this could work? A mining partnership run by the community instead of outside investors? Catherine looked back at her family's humble cabin, then gazed out over the valley that had been her entire world. Tonight, that world had suddenly become full of possibilities she had never dreamed of. I think, she said carefully, that the best ideas usually seem impossible until someone brave enough tries to make them real. William smiled, and Catherine realized that somewhere between his arrival and this moment, she had stopped seeing him as a wealthy outsider and started seeing him as simply William, a man, trying to figure out how to live with honor in a complicated world. The hammer struck Will's thumb instead of the nail, sending him stumbling backward with a sharp cry that echoed across the construction site. Catherine looked up from her herb garden, watching as her husband-to-be shook his injured hand and muttered words she pretended not to hear. 3 months had passed since the town meeting that changed everything, and Will was still learning that building things required more than good intentions. Maybe you should stick to holding the board steady, called out Tom Rivera, the local carpenter who'd become Will's unlikely teacher. The other workers chuckled, but their laughter held warmth rather than mockery. They'd grown to respect this Eastern man who showed up every morning ready to learn, even if he couldn't tell a Phillips head from a flathead screwdriver. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the men. The processing facility was taking shape faster than anyone had expected. What started as sketches on paper now stood as real walls and a roof that would soon house equipment shipped from back east. But the real miracle wasn't the building itself. It was watching her community work alongside someone they'd once viewed with suspicion. How's the thumb? She asked, taking Will's hand in hers to examine the damage. It'll live, he replied, though his wince suggested otherwise. I'm starting to understand why my father always hired other people to build things. Your father never got to feel the satisfaction of creating something with his own hands, Catherine said, binding his thumb with a strip of clean cloth from her pocket. That makes you richer than he ever was. Will smiled at her words, but Catherine noticed the shadow that crossed his face whenever his father was mentioned. Letters from Boston had stopped coming entirely after Will's official dismissal from Montgomery Mining Company. The silence hurt him more than he admitted, though he claimed relief at being free from expectations that never fit. Speaking of your father, Catherine said carefully, Daniel saw a fancy carriage heading toward town this morning. The driver was asking directions to the hotel. Will's face went pale beneath his tan. Did Daniel get a look at who was inside? Too far away to tell. But the carriage had markings on the side, something that looked like a mountain with picks crossed underneath it. The Montgomery family crest. Will's stomach dropped like a stone thrown into deep water. He'd known this day would come eventually, but he'd hoped for more time. Time to prove his new path was working. Time to show that choosing love over duty hadn't been a mistake. I should go into town, he said, already untying his work apron. We should go into town, Catherine corrected. Whatever your father has to say, you won't face it alone. The ride into Silver Creek felt longer than usual, though their horse maintained its steady pace. Will's mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. Had his father come to demand he return to Boston? To buy out the partnership and destroy what they'd built? Or worse, had something happened to his mother or sister? The hotel's front porch was empty when they arrived, but the fancy carriage sat outside like a challenge. Its polished black surface gleamed, despite the dust of travel, and the driver wore livery that cost more than most Silver Creek families spent in a year. Mr. Montgomery? The hotel clerk's nervous voice greeted them as they entered. Your father is waiting in the private dining room. He asked to see you alone. Catherine squeezed Will's hand. I'll be right here, she whispered. Whatever he says, remember that you chose this life for good reasons. The private dining room felt smaller than Will remembered, perhaps because his father's presence seemed to fill every corner. Charles Montgomery sat rigidly at the head of the table, his expensive suit unmarked by travel dust. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his beard trimmed with mathematical precision. Everything about him spoke of control and expectation. William. His father's voice carried the same cold formality that had ruled Will's childhood. You look different. I look like someone who works for a living, Will replied, taking the seat across from his father without waiting for permission. What brings you to Silver Creek, father? Charles Montgomery's eyes swept over his son's calloused hands, his sun-darkened skin, his simple clothes. I came to see what foolishness had possessed my heir. The reports I received seemed too ridiculous to believe. What reports? That you'd thrown away your inheritance to play farmer with a collection of dirt-poor settlers. That you'd fallen under the spell of some local girl who convinced you to betray your own family's interests. Will's jaw tightened. Catherine Miller didn't convince me of anything. She showed me what it looked like to care about something beyond profit margins. Catherine Miller. Charles spoke the name like it tasted bitter. The daughter of a failed miner with debts larger than his prospects. I suppose she seemed quite grateful for your attention. Stop. Will's voice cut sharp through the air. You don't know her. And you don't know what we've built here. Built? Charles leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing at his lips. William, you've built nothing. You've simply given away everything your grandfather and I spent decades creating. The Montgomery name meant something before you decided to play at being common. The words hit their target, but Will found himself thinking of Tom Rivera's patient teaching, of the school children who now had proper desks, of families who no longer feared losing their homes to corporate expansion. Maybe the Montgomery name needed to mean something different. His father's expression hardened. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to debate philosophy with a son who's forgotten his place. I came to offer you one final chance to return where you belong. And if I refuse, then you'll discover what life is truly like without the safety net you've always taken for granted. Your little partnership here exists because I've chosen not to crush it. That tolerance ends today. Will felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but his voice stayed steady. What exactly are you threatening? Charles Montgomery smiled, and it was the coldest expression Will had ever seen on his father's face. I'm not threatening, son. I'm simply explaining reality. Montgomery Mining Company has larger plans for this territory. Plans that don't include amateur partnerships with sentimental fools. Unless you return to Boston immediately, I'll ensure that Silver Creek learns what happens when communities stand in the way of progress. The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither man was willing to cross first. Outside, Will could hear the normal sounds of the town horses in the street, children playing, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. All of it suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble that could burst with a single wrong move. I need time to think, Will said finally. You have until sunset tomorrow, his father replied. After that, my patience expires, along with my son's last chance at redemption. Charles Montgomery stood, smoothing his jacket with practiced precision. I'm staying at this hotel tonight. I suggest you spend the time wisely, perhaps explaining to your Miss Miller and her friends what their stubbornness will cost them. He walked toward the door, then paused. William, I raised you to lead, not to follow. This infatuation with playing common has clouded your judgment, but it's not too late to remember who you really are. After his father left, Will sat alone in the dining room for a long time, staring at hands that bore honest calluses but might not be strong enough to protect everything he'd come to love. Catherine found Will sitting by the creek that gave their town its name, throwing pebbles into the water with mechanical precision. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that should have been beautiful but somehow felt ominous instead. She'd waited 3 hours for him to return from his meeting with his father, and when he finally appeared, his face told her everything she needed to know. He wants you to go back, she said, settling beside him on the smooth boulder that had become their favorite thinking spot. Will nodded without looking at her. He's giving me until sunset tomorrow to decide. If I stay, he'll destroy everything we've built here." Catherine's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice calm. Can he actually do that? Montgomery Mining Company has enough money and political connections to make life very difficult for Silver Creek. Father could buy up surrounding land, divert water rights, even convince territorial officials to condemn properties for public works projects. Will's voice was flat, drained of the enthusiasm that had carried him through months of hard work and hope. "So you're thinking about leaving?" It wasn't a question, and Will didn't treat it like one. "I'm thinking about what gives me the right to risk everyone else's future for my own happiness." Catherine picked up her own pebble, feeling its smooth surface warm from the day's heat. "Can I tell you a story?" Will looked at her with surprise. In all their months together, Catherine had never been one for stories during serious conversations. "When I was 12, she began, "our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had a beautiful garden. Best vegetables in the valley, flowers that made everyone stop and stare. But every year, rabbits would come and eat half her crops." She threw her pebble, watching it skip twice before sinking. One year, she got so frustrated that she decided to poison the whole garden rather than let the rabbits have any of it. Killed every plant, every flower, everything she'd worked so hard to grow. Will waited for her to continue, sensing there was more to the story. The next spring, Mrs. Patterson tried to start over, but the soil was ruined. Nothing would grow properly for 3 years. And you know what? The rabbits just moved on to other gardens. She destroyed her own work for nothing. "I'm not sure I understand the connection," Will said carefully. Catherine turned to face him fully, her dark eyes intense in the fading light. "Your father is threatening to poison the garden rather than let the rabbits have it. But here's what he doesn't understand. We're not rabbits stealing someone else's crops. We're people growing our own food on our own land." She reached for his hands, her fingers tracing the calluses he'd earned working alongside her neighbors. "Will, you came here to acquire land for your father's company. Instead, you helped us build something that serves our community. That wasn't betrayal, that was growth. But if he carries out his threats, then we'll face whatever comes together, the same way we've faced everything else." Catherine's voice grew stronger. "But I won't watch you destroy the good thing we've built out of fear of what your father might do." Will studied her face, seeing the determination that had first drawn him to her outside Henderson's store. "Catherine, you don't understand what he's capable of. Montgomery Mining Company has crushed communities before. And Silver Creek has survived droughts, floods, mine collapses, and everything else this territory could throw at us. We're tougher than your father thinks." Before Will could respond, they heard horses approaching fast along the creek path. Daniel Miller appeared around the bend, riding hard with news written all over his young face. "Catherine! Will!" Daniel called as he pulled up beside them. "You need to get back to town right away. Something's happening at the hotel." The ride back to Silver Creek revealed chaos in the streets. People were gathered in small groups, their voices carrying worry and anger in equal measure. The fancy carriage still sat outside the hotel, but now it was surrounded by townspeople who looked ready for trouble. "What's going on?" Catherine asked Mrs. Henderson as they approached the crowd. "That Eastern man, Will's father, he's been making offers," Mrs. Henderson replied, her face flushed with indignation. "Trying to buy people out, offering twice what their land is worth if they'll sell immediately." Will felt his heart sink. His father wasn't waiting until tomorrow after all. "Some folks are tempted," continued Mrs. Henderson. "The Richards family is struggling since John hurt his back. That much money would solve all their problems." Catherine looked around at the faces in the crowd, neighbors she'd known all her life. People who'd worked together to build the partnership with Will's company. Fear and uncertainty were written on every face, along with a desperate calculation of people who'd never had enough money to feel secure. "Where is my father now?" Will asked. "Still inside, meeting with families one by one," Tom Rivera answered. "He's systematic, I'll give him that. Started with the people who have the most to lose and the least to bargain with. Will squared his shoulders. I need to stop this. We need to stop this, Catherine corrected, taking his arm. Whatever you're planning to say to him, we say it together. They pushed through the crowd toward the hotel entrance. Inside, they could hear Charles Montgomery's cultured voice through the thin walls of the private dining room, smooth as honey and twice as persuasive. Mr. and Mrs. Richards, I understand your situation completely. Medical expenses, lost wages, uncertainty about the future, these burdens are precisely why I'm offering you a way out. Will knocked once on the door, then opened it without waiting for permission. His father sat across from John Richards and his wife Mary, a stack of legal papers spread between them like a promise of salvation. Father, this meeting is over. Charles Montgomery's smile never wavered. William, how good of you to join us. I was just explaining to the Richards family how they might benefit from my company's expansion plans. By selling land that's been in their family for 15 years? By accepting fair compensation for property that may become complicated to maintain in the near future. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Will saw John Richards glance between him and his father, understanding dawning in his weathered face. Mr. Montgomery, John said slowly, are you saying that if we don't sell, we might have trouble keeping our land anyway? I'm saying that change is coming to this territory, whether people welcome it or not. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who resist. Charles shrugged elegantly. Catherine stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room's tension like a blade. Mr. Montgomery, I think you should know that the territorial governor is very interested in our partnership here. He's planning to visit next month to see how cooperation between mining companies and local communities might serve as a model for other developments. Will looked at Catherine in surprise. She'd never mentioned any contact with territorial officials. Charles Montgomery's smile flickered for the first time. I wasn't aware of any governmental involvement. Oh yes, Catherine continued smoothly. The governor is particularly interested in how we've managed to increase productivity while maintaining community ownership. He's even talking about featuring Silver Creek in his report to Washington about successful territorial development. It was a complete fabrication, but Catherine delivered it with such confidence that even Will almost believed her. More importantly, she'd struck directly at Charles Montgomery's weakness, his need to maintain political connections and his fear of unwanted government attention. I see, Charles said carefully. Perhaps I should reconsider the timing of these discussions. Perhaps you should, Will agreed, understanding Catherine's strategy. Father, why don't we finish our conversation privately? Mr. and Mrs. Richards, you don't need to make any decisions today. After the Richards family left, Charles Montgomery stood slowly, his perfect composure finally showing cracks. That was cleverly done, Miss Miller. I underestimated you. Most people do, Catherine replied calmly. It's one of my advantages. Charles turned to his son. William, you still have until sunset tomorrow. But understand that if you choose to stay, you'll be choosing a life of constant struggle against forces larger than yourself. Maybe, Will replied, but I'll be choosing it with people who fight beside me instead of expecting me to fight their battles for them. His father's face hardened. Very well, but don't come running back to Boston when your noble experiment collapses. I won't need to, Will said firmly, because it won't collapse. We built it to last. After Charles Montgomery left, Will and Catherine walked out into the cool evening air. The crowd had dispersed, but lights glowed warmly in windows throughout Silver Creek. The sight filled Will with a contentment he'd never felt during all his years of privilege in Boston. Was any of that true? He asked Catherine. About the territorial governor? Catherine grinned. Not a word. But I figured your father wouldn't risk calling my bluff. Not with his political reputation to consider. Will laughed, feeling lighter than he had all day. You realize you just committed to making it true now, don't you? We'll have to actually invite the governor to visit. I was hoping you'd say that, Catherine replied, because I already sent him a letter yesterday, before your father even arrived. Turns out the territorial government is very interested in development models that don't displace existing communities. Will stopped walking and stared at her. You sent a letter to the governor? When? How? When Daniel told me about the fancy carriage this morning, I had a feeling your father wasn't coming for a friendly family reunion. So, I wrote to territorial officials, explaining our partnership and inviting them to see what we've built. Catherine's expression grew serious. Will, I've lived my whole life watching powerful people make decisions about my future without asking what I wanted. I decided it was time to start making my own decisions. The next morning, Will stood on the hill behind the construction site, watching his father's carriage disappear into the distance. The sunrise painted the desert in soft shades of gold and pink, and the sound of hammers and saws was already beginning as work resumed on the processing facility. Catherine joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who'd slept well despite yesterday's drama. Any regrets? She asked, handing him a cup. Will considered the question seriously. About choosing this life? None. About the way I handled things with my father? Maybe. I could have been kinder. He wasn't interested in kindness, Catherine pointed out. He was interested in control. There's a difference. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their community wake up to another day of building something worthwhile. In the distance, Will could see Tom Rivera directing the installation of new equipment, while children played in the schoolyard they'd helped fund. Catherine, Will said suddenly, will you marry me? She nearly spilled her coffee. I thought we'd already decided that. We'd talked about it, planned for it, assumed it would happen. But I realized yesterday that I never actually asked you properly. Will set down his cup and took her hands. Catherine Miller, will you marry me not because it makes practical sense or because we've been through so much together, but because I love you and can't imagine building any kind of future without you in it. Catherine's smile was brighter than the sunrise. William Montgomery Will, I would be honored to marry you, not because you saved me from poverty or because you chose me over your inheritance, but because you showed me what it looks like when someone chooses love over fear. As they kissed, the sounds of Silver Creek surrounded them, children laughing, adults calling to each other as they began their daily work, the steady rhythm of progress that included everyone rather than leaving people behind. Later, historians would write about the Silver Creek Partnership as an early model for responsible development in the American West. They would analyze its economic impact and political significance, its role in territorial governance and industrial growth. But for the people who lived it, the story was simpler and more profound. 2 strangers had met by accident, discovered that kindness was more powerful than wealth or status, and decided to build a life based on what they could create together, rather than what they could inherit separately. The heart of Silver Creek, it turned out, wasn't found in the creek itself or in the silver that still lay buried in the mountains. It was found in the choice to see each person as valuable, each community as worth preserving, and each day as an opportunity to build something better than what came before.